it's wonderful to see that Globelics, at the age of 20 years, is still very much alive. I could see, have a view of the audience, a lot of old friends, but also, even more important, a lot of young, new faces, which I could guess come from very different parts of the world, taking the way they look. I'm going to speak a little about the history of Globelics and point out some major challenges. But before that, I would say that both me and Luc, we are very skeptical to concepts like optimum. That's something you have in neoclassical theory. But I think I would like to say that in this very case, they have found the location for an anniversary of Globelics. It has to do with the fact that Kerala is already known worldwide for its inclusive development policies. And over the last 10 years, there's been this growing focus on building a knowledge society. And I'm aware that my co-speaker, who I can see, is one of the intellectual leaders in taking Kerala this way. So it is actually the optimum site we found. And I want to, of course, say a great thanks to the government of Kerala and the government of India for their support of Globelics. And of course, thanks to KJ and his colleagues for taking on this extremely complex task to organize this anniversary conference. I'm aware when you mix people speaking long distance like myself and people being there, it gets double complicated, and it is complicated in before. I have great memories from Globelics conference 2006 in Thiruvananthapuram. I actually had one of my most wonderful anniversaries, my 75-year anniversary on the beach. And it is, of course, with great regret that I had to decide that the journey would be too difficult for a person of my age. So, welcome to all participants. I trust that you all will respect the basic rule of Globelics gatherings, which means you should work hard and have fun. I'm sure you will do that. Let me say a little about the origin of Globelics. It was really something you might call collective entrepreneurship behind it. The first ideas were developed at the end of the earlier millennium. Actually, I think we first discussed it in Rio, 1999, and we discussed it also in context with developing the book Africa First with African colleagues in Aalborg in 2000. Luc and me, we had ongoing dialogue on how to go ahead, and he played a very important role in co-designing the network. And we took inspiration from Chris Freeman and Richard Nelson. Dick, he actually took on a very active role. He came to a series of conferences and was a very important person in Globelics Scientific Board. Several persons from the Global South organized important conferences. Shulingu, China, Jose Casiolato, Rio Mamumuchi, Africa, and together with Dave Kaplan in South Africa. One important part, and I think it's very fundamental for Globelics, are the annual Globelics Academies. And here Manuel Heitor and Manuel Godinho, they started this from Portugal, and later they were joined by Erkki Kaukonen, Mika Kaufman, or Mika Rainio. I remember we always spoke about the two manuals and the two Mikas. And gradually the regional leagues were initiated, first in Africa, Interacumed Pataparong in Latin America, Gabriela Trinit was involved, Africa, Anna Kingiri and Bitrina, Shainak, Shabobu, and Joseph. And I could use the rest of my time mentioning a lot of other people, including fantastic colleagues who worked with me in the Secretariat over the first 10, 15 years. But I would like to move on. Why did we think Globelics was a good idea? We saw innovation, knowledge and learning as key to bridging the development divide. And therefore, we focused on fostering new generations of innovation scholars in the South who could help their governments to develop strategies leading towards knowledge-based societies and sustainable development. Second, we saw networking as a good method to build competencies. It was based on a series of positive experiences from networking in Europe. I'm sure Luc remembers we had one of the first networks on evolutionary economics was called UNEVIC, and it ran in the very beginning of the 90s. One thing which has been extremely important for Globelics is the culture. We had a cultural heritage from Freeman and Nelson. And that was, as I see it, diversity tolerance, respect for young people, and interdisciplinarity. And also they had wonderful sense of humor, these two people. So we decided that Globelics should be serious, but not too serious. And as Luc mentioned, me and him, we took on the roles of some comics characters, Obelix and Asterix. You should know that Obelix is very clumsy. He's not very smart. That's me. And Luc, Asterix, he's so smart, you know. And that is, of course, Luc. So, when we go back, we can see that the Global Scientific Board, it was actually people we had picked up in different ways, we knew very well, and we had respect for. And it was myself, Luc, Nelson, Freeman, Casiolato, Friede Kramer. He became vice minister in science technology in Germany. George Nyosi from Canada. Dave Kaplan, South Africa. Manuel Heitor became also vice minister in Portugal and science technology. So they had to leave the scientific board after some years for the Shulingu from China. But as you see, if you can read the names, there were 9 men and 1 woman. Shulingu from China was the only woman. And after that, and I'm very proud of that, we have had a very successful transformation of leadership. If you look at the composition of Globelics Scientific Board, it has systematic diversity in terms of gender, age, and geography, and there are, of course, much broader disciplinary work with much stronger representation of development scholars, sociologists, political science, etc. Let me now move on to what I see as three challenges. One of them has been there all the time. And my point here is that we should recognize and respect diversity. We should not try to hide it, that we have potential disagreement on how we look at things. There are tensions between development studies, innovation studies. There are tensions between innovation studies versus SDS tradition. I found systematic differences in perspectives in Latin America, as represented by LALIX and AsiaLix and AfricaLix. If you look at their respective conference themes, you will find that they have different profiles. And we have old school versus new generations. And I think it's a major task for the scientific board and for the intellectual leaders in Globelics. First, to insist on tolerance and respect for those who are different. We must accept that we have different opinions. And second, even perhaps more important, to initiate interactive learning across this diversity, because diversity can be exploited into a very positive way. One way to do so is to make diverse scholars work together to produce new knowledge. For instance, in big Globelics-wide projects. This is, I think, something you should give priority. The other issue is about fundraising. It's been a constant organizational challenge. To begin with, all the central activities of Globelics were financed from the north. Aalborg University, private foundations, SIDA Sweden, and the EU gave different contributions. But at the same time, local fundraising in the south for conferences and academies were in volume at least, or perhaps even more important. Globelics has a lean organization, but it needs a secretariat with some resources, including the digital ICT presence. You need local funding for conferences, academies, for regional activities. Ideally, there should also be regular funding for the travel of young scholars from the south and for intercontinental research projects such as the Catching Up project and the BRICS project. One issue here, I think, is if you should direct more attention to fundraising, also to the central activities, to sources in the global south. BRICS countries, enterprises, big enterprises from BRICS countries, trying to get them involved in financing Globelics, because Globelics is there to strengthen the global south, so it's logic. So I come to the last challenge, and this one has more to do with the content of the research agenda. I think for me now it stands completely clear that the most important reason for global inequality is the monopolization of knowledge by actors in the north. To illustrate, according to the World Bank, 95% of income from intellectual property goes to the north. 95%. And this is just the top of the iceberg. In 2020, low and middle income countries paid 77 billion US dollar in royalties, and they received 13 billion US dollars. The least developed countries paid almost 300 million US dollars and received less than 70 million. It's interesting to note that the country which has done most to establish its own intellectual property income has still has enraged the U.S. and to some degree also partners in Europe. They have been accused for stealing intellectual property. Still, we can see that China pays more for U.S. intellectual property than it earns. And the payments to the U.S. has increased more than its GMP. So I'm going to show you, if you look at the lower diagram, you can see intellectual property payments to the U.S. as compared to the growth in GDP. And as I said, this is just the top of the iceberg. Intellectual monopolies harvest rents worldwide in medicine, digital services, and green technology. And I think it's an issue also for Globelics to ask the question how to change the world order so that the countries in the global south get a chance to develop stronger national innovation systems. I have written some paper, including one for the conference, Globelics conference. I will not be able to present it myself, but it will be there, where I talk about the current world disorder. We can see how several crises call for new forms of global governance and for mobilizing knowledge to address the different crises. We had the financial crisis 2002 and the Great Recession 2009, and perhaps most dramatic in those days, we get more and more scientific evidence that the climate crisis is becoming a real and acute threat to humanity. And I think the COVID crisis illustrated what happens when nature strikes back. And artificial intelligence is a high-risk technology. But the last decade has split the world system, undermining collaboration in the production and use of knowledge. We see how the vulnerability of people living in low-income countries is extremely high, and we see the northern knowledge monopoly. We see China's rise as an economic great power and the U.S. Reaction in form of a declaration of war against China. I think, therefore, we might need to broaden the Globelics mission. The different crises demonstrate that it is necessary to build stronger national sustainable innovation system in the South. And this is the central mission also for the future. We know that the North will not voluntarily share critical knowledge. We can see, for instance, the issue of the COVID vaccines, where African countries actually had to pay a higher price than European countries for vaccines, which was completely unacceptable. But my point is, it's not sufficient to build stronger innovation systems. There is a need to take a critical look at the world system which has produced the current disorder and to consider the potential of the global south in shaping a new sustainable world order based on knowledge sharing. Globelics was built from the assumption that innovation has a potential to solve problems and lead to development. Perhaps we were somewhat influenced by the idea which Luc was one of the first to criticize, that innovation is good for you. But now, today, we can see how tech giants in pharma, artificial intelligence, they engage in innovation with the primary aim to establish knowledge monopolies that exclude the South. So this is why I end by asking the question, should Globelics scholars have a somewhat stronger focus on the political economy, on geopolitics of knowledge and innovation? It would be an issue of adding to agenda, not to substitute for what is going on now. So let me end by saying, in a world characterized by deep geo-economic and geopolitical divides, Globelics constitutes a very important and unique platform where scholars from all parts of the world can meet. And the original mission of Globelics, as we thought about it when it all started, to close the knowledge divide between the North and South, is more important than ever. And wish you all a very successful conference. I'm somewhat envious I can't be there together with you. Thank you very much.